All right, our jurors and alternates have returned. And one more juror needs a transcript. Do you have a clean one?
I have, yes, we have one here that, we have one without markings on it.
Good. Okay, that'll do. All right, so our jurors and alternates have returned. Mr. Durst is present with Mr. DeGuerin and Mr. Chestnut. And we have Mr. Henderson for the people at council table, along with Mr. Lewin, Mr. Bailey, and Mr. Milius, Mr. Miata. We're listening to the recorded testimony of Detective Struk. And please pay close attention, and just as if a witness were testifying live. And you may resume the video.
Thank you, Your Honor. I'm resuming where we left off. It's day 2, 1 hour, 28 minutes, and 23 seconds.
I recall that.
So is it fair to say that very early in this investigation, February 5th, February 8th, February 9th, you're getting repeated statements from different witnesses saying that Bob is physically abusing Kathie, correct?
Correct.
I was reading from People 75, paraphrasing. Thank you. Detective, do you recall when you were interviewing Gilbert and Johnny on February 10th, 1982? So this document, which we'll call the itinerary, you received this document from Gilbert during that interview, which took place on February 10th. Is that correct?
I believe so, yes.
And it says itinerary, and it says Monday, 10 a.m., Ridgefield, Connecticut. Do you see that?
Yes.
There's something underneath. 2:30, it has another indication. 4 o'clock, something about a hat. 5 o'clock, office. 7, film or whatever. Tuesday, 2 a.m., South Salem. 7 a.m., leave house. Third entry says drive. 8, garage. 8, apartment, Oscar Mayo. Then it says Wednesday, 10 a.m. Difficult to read. 11 a.m. something, 12 a.m. something, etc. Is it your understanding that this was presented to you by Gilbert and Johnny as something that Bob Durst had prepared?
Yes.
Detective, do you have a memory as you sit here and call this the itinerary of this being presented to you?
Yeah, I recall seeing it, yes.
And is your memory, is it consistent with it having been presented to you in the way that it was described? That Gilbert and Johnny gave it to you saying it was recovered by the cleaning lady from Bob Durst's house in New York.
I recall that.
You got this on February 9th.
Okay.
Did you go back and re-interview Mr. Durst to go through what was on the itinerary specifically?
To go back to this?
Yes.
No.
I'm going to go back to that. All right. February 10th, I should have said that. on February the 16th, you testified, I believe previously on direct, it was discussed in your reports that were related to, that Riverside Drive was processed by an evidence team from NYPD, is that correct?
I recall that, yes.
And they did a full processing, right? Look for blood, like,
At this point, it's maybe time for me to mark the one document I couldn't find earlier. People's 100, Your Honor. It's 3 pages. The first page is LADA base 004479. It details activities conducted by Detective Struk on February 16th, 1982, and going to 37 Riverside Drive with the crime scene unit. And the second page is LADA base 4752. And the third page is 4753. And these are 2 handwritten notes from Detective Struk's memo pad detailing his activities on February 16th at 37 Riverside Drive with the CSU crime scene unit.
what is CSU? Sure. 4479. You already have it. LDA. What is CSU?
I'm saying,
So this was your, back in 1982, this was the unit that came out and they really processed the scene, correct?
well, the process that particular location.
In other words, as a homicide detective, you yourself did not do sophisticated crime scene documentation, correct?
No, they've done it. My recollection is that they processed the scenes for any trace or any kind of blood. I believe they used an agent, probably a luminol agent, or if not that, perhaps a glucocrystal. I don't know if that was used at the time, but I do recall that.
And they looked for blood, they took photos of the apartment, and this is the Riverside Drive, and they found nothing, is that correct? I apologize, Your Honor, because of the way I had it diagrammed out before, I've had to, with the way we've done it, it's saved time, but I'm now having to change how I'm doing it, so I apologize for having to spend this few seconds here getting this ready. March 5th, 1984, you received a letter from Attorney Nick Scapetta. You documented wanting to know any developments. You put that in your chronology. Is that correct? Do you need to refresh your recollection, or will you?
I take your word for it that it exists. I just don't remember it vividly.
So there's an entry, March 5th, 84. That is almost 2 years after Mr. Scapetta told you that he only wanted contact with him. As you sit here today, did Mr. Scapetta in any way offer to assist you in your investigation? Did he offer to have Mr. Durst come in and talk to you?
No.
And when you noted that he wanted to know the developments, what does that mean when you write that? Explain what you mean by that.
And he wanted to know what we were doing.
In the call that Mr. Scapetta made, in any way, shape, or form, did he express to you that his client wanted to assist in the investigation?
No.
And is the way that you took it at the time that Mr. Scapetta was trying to check out to see, hey, what have you found?
That's what I interpreted it as. That he was fishing.
Were you ever contacted, to the best of your memory, by Mr. Durst directly after you received the indication from Mr. Cepeda, April 26th of 1982, that he didn't want you to talk to his client?
No,
Were you ever contacted by Mr. Cepeda after the date I just talked to you about, March 5th, 1984?
no.
Detective, how did your investigation end?
It never really ended. Officially it ended for me in my retirement. However, the status as far as our team were concerned and what our team conferences always were, was that Mr. Durst remained a person of interest, and he was never declared a suspect for obvious reasons, and it became cold after a while, as many cases do.
At the time when your investigation ended, which was before you retired, correct? Is that right? At that point in time, what was your determination as to what had happened? Not asking about today, I'm asking back at the time.
That's how I am answering.
At that time, did you believe that Mr. Durst was responsible for the disappearance and death of his wife?
With the amount of conduct that Mr. Durst was involved in, that I had heard from enough people, it was certainly reasonable to believe that he had something to do with her disappearance. That was my opinion.
When you say it was reasonably, I'm asking you, is that at the time that you stopped working on the case, was that your belief at the time?
Yes.
Now, detective, was there ever any indication in this case that Kathie Durst had intentionally, voluntarily absented herself?
No.
Is it fair to say that all of her friends and family said that you spoke to said she was excited about finishing medical school?
Yes.
She was excited about becoming a doctor.
Yes.
She was excited about starting her new life.
Yes.
Detective, was there any other suspect that you were looking at the end of your investigation other than Robert Durst?
No.
Now, in terms of our contact, detective, have I told you from the start that when you testify that you need to tell the truth?
Of course.
Detective Struk, did I say to you, if you made mistakes in this case, it's really important that you acknowledge them, correct?
Absolutely.
Did you do that yesterday with Mr. DeGuerin? Did you acknowledge any mistakes?
The questions that you put forth to me were very narrow.
Okay. Yesterday, do you recall saying that you were professionally comfortable with how you handled this case?
Yes, I do remember that.
I want to ask you, as you sit here today, how would you grade the job you did on the original investigation?
Well, I don't know. I mean, there's always things that could have been done. It's easy to quarterback sitting here today. I have a lot of different views today. But I think collectively, with my colleagues and my bosses, our game plan and how we handle this, I'm comfortable.
Let it break. You're in school. What'd you give yourself?
Yeah, I'll give you myself a 8.
What mistakes, you sit here now specifically, can you tell me what mistakes you're aware of that you made in the original investigation?
I can't think of anyone that hurts me more than any other. We operated for many months, purposely keeping him as a person of interest in hope that something would materialized, we would have at least another approach at him without Miranda. But then Mr. Scapetta stepped in, and that kind of changed things.
Detective, again, I'm not asking you to go through what you did on the case. I'm saying right now, you've been talking about this case for a day and a half now. You've spent hours looking at this case, discussing it over the years, correct?
Yeah.
Now I'm asking you right now, tell me what mistakes, if any, did you make on this case? If you didn't make any, then tell us, I don't believe I made any mistakes.
I just don't, I don't think of any particular mistake that I regret. Did I, was the investigation perfect? I don't think any investigation is perfect. So I think the question was kind of unfair.
All right, let me continue. As you sit here today, you believe Kathie Durst is dead, is that correct?
It would be hard to think otherwise.
As you sit, at the end of your investigation, did you believe that Robert Durst was responsible for Kathie Durst's disappearance and death?
I thought that with the amount of information that we had gleaned throughout the investigation with his conduct towards her, yeah, it would be hard to believe otherwise.
And you believed at the end of your investigation, that was your belief, that Bob Durst was responsible for Kathie's disappearance and death. Is that correct?
That was my belief, yeah.
And let me ask you, can you tell me when it was during the investigation that you came to that opinion?
Fairly early on.
Very early. In fact, Detective, did you previously state to Detective Becerra on December 20th, 1999, that from the beginning you felt that Bob Durst was responsible for Kathie Durst's disappearance?
Correct.
And by disappearance, you also meant death. Is that correct?
Kind of means the same thing, but yes.
We'll take a recess. 3:25. We'll be in recess until 3:25.
Detective, when you told Detective Becerra on December 20th, 1999, that from the beginning you felt that Bob Durst was responsible for Kathie's disappearance, did you mean death as well?
Probably yes.
Detective, you testified that you ended up believing that in fact you didn't have a proper venue because what had happened to Kathie Durst had happened outside of Manhattan. Is that correct?
That's my belief, yes.
And my question is, when did you come to that opinion?
I formed that opinion much more firmly after I retired, and when these different things were starting to come forward as to the personnel in the building and Dr. Cooper.
Detective, so when you told Detective Becerra that from the beginning you felt that Bob Durst was responsible, I'm trying to understand that answer with the answer you just gave, which was that later on after you retired. So I'm asking, you said that you told Detective Becerra that from the beginning you believe Bob Durst was responsible, correct?
That's correct.
So if that is the case, from the beginning, very early on, did you believe that Kathie Durst had not made it into Manhattan?
Well, from the very beginning of the investigation, no, I did not know that then.
So that's what I'm asking. So would you agree, Detective, that very soon in the investigation, very early in the investigation, you came to believe that Kathie Durst had not made it into Manhattan?
Not very soon, no.
When?
I was always, please let me finish.
Sure.
I had totally believed that she did come into the city. As the investigation went forward and you learn a little bit more about Mr. Durst's conduct and different things, Of course, my views on that started to change. Now, going beyond my retirement, if I'm permitted to talk about that?
No, but I'm asking you, so when you told Detective Becerra that from the beginning, you felt Bob Durst was responsible, are you saying now that actually it wasn't the very beginning, it was sometime during the investigation?
Well, as it progressed, it just became stronger and stronger, of course.
So that's what I'm asking you approximately, if you can tell me. That's okay, but approximately, she disappeared January 31st. You reported her on February 5th. So I'm asking you, to the best of your memory, approximately when did you come to the conclusion yourself, the belief, that Kathie Durst never made it into Manhattan?
I think several weeks after the missing person report, it started to appear that he certainly had a hand in it. That was my personal belief.
And one moment. You indicated that a large part of that belief was based originally on Dr. Cooperman, is that correct? That she had made it, your original belief that she had made it in Manhattan was based on Dr. Cooperman, is that correct?
That's correct.
Did you establish how many times Dr. Cooperman and Kathie Durst had spoken prior to her disappearance?
Sitting here today, I don't recall. I think twice.
I want you to assume for a moment, Detective Struk, that Dr. Cooperman has testified that he spoke to Kathie no more than 3 or 4 times during her entire time at medical school, and for a total time of maybe 15 minutes. Is that your understanding? Is that your understanding of what Dr. Cooperman told you at the time?
No.
What was your understanding?
No,
Let me finish. What was your understanding of how many times Dr. Cooperman had spoken to Kathie Durst?
My questioning with Dr. Cooperman was for that day that she called in sick. It centered mainly around that and why she didn't show up that day.
Did you ever establish whether Dr. Cooperman knew specifically what Kathie Durst's voice sounded like?
I just don't recall exactly whether or not I covered that.
Detective, do you think that in trying to figure out whether or not this was a call that came from Kathie Durst, that it would be important to figure out if the person on the other side of the line knew what her voice sounded like?
As a result of my conversation with him, I felt he knew who he was talking to.
And you felt that he knew he was talking to you, even though you never asked him, do you recognize her voice?
I don't remember all the questions I asked him, Mr. Owens.
Well, I would assume, Detective, that if you would have asked him, in fact,
If I did,
if you recognized her voice, you would have written in your report, Dr. Cooperman recognized that voice as belonging to Kathie Durst, correct? You would have written that.
I would have written that if he said that specifically, if that was discussed.
Detective, when you spoke to Dr. Cooperman, it was your understanding that that's the last person that potentially spoke to Kathie Durst while she was alive, is that correct?
Yes,
And you knew that from the start, correct?
that was my belief.
Don't you think, Detective, that it would have been advisable to clarify with Dr. Cooperman how well he knew Kathie Durst? That's a yes or no question.
You can't answer it yes or no. Because I don't remember every exact question I asked him, so.
That wasn't my question. My question is, would you agree that it would have been advisable for you to determine how well Dr. Cooperman knew Kathie Durst?
I may have.
Again, Detective, I'm going to ask you to answer my question. I'm not asking what you did. I'm asking you, would you agree that as a detective, talking to a witness who is saying they had a phone conversation with somebody, that it would be advisable for you as a detective to ascertain how well that witness knew the person they allegedly spoke to?
That was the purpose of my call.
Is that a yes or a no?
That's a yes.
Detective. Would you agree that it was critically important to ascertain specifically whether or not Dr. Cooperman recognized Kathie's voice?
Yes.
Detective, I want you to assume for a moment that Dr. Cooperman came in and testified that he was never asked that question by you. So my question to you is, would that match your memory or no?
No, it does not. Wasn't I the second person to speak to him?
All right, detective. Is it your memory that you specifically asked Dr. Cooperman how he recognized Kathie's voice?
I don't specifically recall asking him that question sitting here today.
Do you recall if you specifically asked Dr. Cooperman if the reason he believed it was Kathie Durst on the phone because the person identified themselves as Kathie Durst?
That would have been part of the conversation.
My question is, do you recall specifically asking Dr. Cooperman if the reason he believed it was Kathie Durst on the phone was because the person identified themselves as Kathie Durst?
Mr. Lone, I can only tell you at this point, I believe he believed he was speaking to Kathie Durst. That's all I can remember. It's been a long time.
Is there any part of your notes, your chronology, a DD5 report, where you specifically laid out the facts that you had inquired of Dr. Cooperman why it was that he believed that it was Kathie Durst on the phone?
I have notations. Aren't there notations where I say where she's got diarrhea and all that kind of stuff? Isn't that part of his response to me?
What you have written, detective, is you've written what the person on the phone said to Dr. Cooperman as Dr. Cooperman repeated it. Nowhere have you written down that I'm aware of Dr. Cooperman recognized the voice. Would you agree you never wrote that down?
That's correct. I did not write that down.
You never wrote down, you know what, Dr. Cooperman knew what Kathie Durst's voice sounded like because of their relationship. You never wrote that down, correct?
No.
Is that correct?
I just answered no.
Well, so meaning it's I have to double negative, so that the idea would be, is what I just said correct or incorrect?
As to whether or not, please repeat it.
Okay. You never wrote down in chrono notes reports that you inquired of Dr. Cooperman the length and extent and knowledge of his relationship with Kathie Durst.
No, I did not write that.
And when you say you didn't write it down, you would agree, detective, that if you would have asked either of these last two questions, or Dr. Cooperman had furnished those answers, they would be in your reports, correct?
So likely it would be.
Well, when you say likely, would you agree, detective, that if Dr. Cooperman had said, you know what, I knew Kathie's voice, I talked to her every day, and that was Kathie Durst on the phone. If you had heard that information, as a detective, do you believe that would have made the information credible, more credible or less credible than the fact it was Kathie Durst on the line?
I would have quoted him if he said that.
So I'm asking you, Detective, is as the head homicide detective on this case, you're talking to the last person to speak with somebody that identified themselves as Kathie Durst, and I want to make sure you're admitting today that you did not ask them, to the best of your memory. You didn't ask them, do you know what her voice sounds like? Correct?
I'm going to answer it again. My conversation with him is I was satisfied he knew who he was speaking to.
Detective, I'm going to take it one at a time. So you agree that you never asked her, so you never asked Dr. Cooper directly how many times you'd spoken to Kathie Durst on the phone?
I'll say no. Because I don't remember.
So you don't remember. But you agree that if you had done it, it would be documented in one of your reports, chrono, etc.
I would have liked to have done it, yes.
And you also agree, correct or incorrect, do you agree that you also never asked Dr. Cooper if he recognized Kathie's voice specifically? Correct or incorrect?
I can't answer it with just correct or incorrect. I have to keep falling back to the fact that he was telling me how sick she was. And whether or not that was his way of saying that her voice was garbled or not something that he recognized, that's what I came away with. So that I'm not trying to be disrespectful or to avoid your questioning. That's what I remember the essence of my interview with him.
Sir, listen to my question. You have said that you did not document either of these two issues, that you asked Dr. Cooper if he recognized Kathie's voice, or that you asked Dr. Cooper how many times he had spoken to Kathie on the phone. Your answer was, you never documented having asked him those questions. Correct?
Yes, okay, I didn't ask.
And you also said that you believe that if you would have asked those questions or received those answers, you would have documented that. Correct? So I'm asking you, right now in the city, will you concede that was a mistake?
You can see that it's a mistake, then it's a mistake.
No, Detective Struk, you're a homicide detective with 20 years of experience. I'm asking you, not my opinion, do you believe as you sit here that you know what, I made a mistake in not clarifying with Dr. Cooperman why it was that he believed it was Kathie Durst on the phone?
I don't know it to be a mistake, but if I didn't put it down, then it's a mistake.
You would agree that if you didn't clarify it, it would have been a mistake, correct?
So be it, yes.
And you also agree that your habit and custom would be that had that information come out from the witness, you would have documented it, correct?
I probably would have.
So we're left with, do you agree, we're left with, given your habit and custom, that you did not ask either one of those questions to the witness. Do you agree?
I agree.
And you further agree, looking back on it, now you would say, you know what, that was a mistake I made.
It's a mistake.
I want you to assume for a moment, Mr. DeGuerin asked you a lot of questions about what you knew, when you knew it, and how it affected what you did. I want you to assume that Dr. Cooperman had told you, in essence, the following. I got a call from someone who identified themselves as Kathie Durst. I've only spoken to Kathie Durst 2 or 3 times in her entire career in medical school for less than 20 minutes. I do not know specifically what her voice sounds like. And I have never spoken to her on the phone other than this one time. Had Dr. Cooperman given you that information, had you gotten that information, Dr. Cooperman, back in February of 1982, would that have changed the course of your investigation?
Yes. If he had indicated at that time that he was unsure who he spoke to, things would have probably been different, yeah.
And how would your investigation, how would you handle things differently if you would have been made aware of that information from Dr. Cooper back in February of 1982?
Well, it probably would have suggested that, that she had not come into the city, or that he had not spoken to her. And my guess, we may have entertained shot sailing more so, and whether or not our coordination at that time with the state police would have been greater.
So what I'm getting to is that, would you agree, Detective Struk, that because that information did not come out from Dr. Cooper at that time, he was the witness that you really relied on originally for the idea that Kathie had come to Manhattan?
That's correct.
Do you recall talking to a ABC TV show called Vanish, the cold case of Kathie Durst, the investigation of the mysterious disappearance of Kathie Durst, which aired on ABC back in July of 2001. Transcript LAPA 089-835-08 098-835-09849. Do you recall talking to that show?
I've spoken to several shows along the way. That name just doesn't mean anything to me at this point.
Do you recall saying to the suggestion that Susan Berman may have made the call to the dean of Kathie's medical school, I won't go there? Is that consistent with what you would have said back at that time?
I could have said that because I could not prove it.
Now, I want to be clear, 2001 is years before All Good Things and the Jinx, correct? So my question is, what was it that led you to believe, to make the statement and to entertain the idea that Susan Berman might have made that call?
So on the issue of Susan Berman, never became really an issue to me or had held as much importance until after the state police came here. I don't know when Ms. Berman's murder was. Perhaps you can help me with that?
So you're saying that your belief as to why you would have said that in 2001 would have been because of contacts you had had with New York State Police?
That's what I'm saying. I'm saying it's possible.
Right, Detective, that's why I'm asking the question. As I said before, I don't know the answers on
Because
this.
time and dates to me at this point,
As part of your investigation in 1982, you sought phone records for the various locations that we've stipulated to before. Bob Durst's house in South Salem, the house on Riverside Drive, the penthouse on Riverside Drive, the penthouse on the apartment on East 86th Street, and Mr. Durst's work location in Manhattan. Is that correct?
yes, sir.
We have her. Did you seek and obtain the records for the telephone stuff by grand jury subpoena at 37 Riverside Drive?
It was a subpoena, yes.
Did you seek and obtain the records for the telephone on White Street in South Salem?
Possibly. There were several locations we did. I don't remember all the locations.
Perfect. From the first time you interviewed Bob Durst, is it fair to say you were suspicious?
Yes.
Your reaction, you said before, that it seemed bizarre. He's coming here 5 days And you have said before, quote, that would excite any detective at that point. You know, how can you have it, why are you here after 5 days? Is that correct?
Would it be fair to say that?
And from your initial interview on, is it fair to say that you caught Robert Durst in numerous lies?
Inconsistencies, yes.
Well, when you say inconsistencies,
Yeah.
did you catch him in when I use the term lie? Did you take...
Let's say lies.
Okay, so that's what I'm saying. Somebody can be... You're a detective, so I'm asking you. You were conducting these interviews, you got the information from Mr. Durst. So with respect to the status of his marriage, when he said his marriage was good, no problems, and you found it otherwise, did you take that as an innocent misrecollection, or did you take it as a lie?
That would be a lie.
He went through in great detail, do you recall, what he was doing on the various days. Is that right?
Yes.
Would you agree that that timeline he gave you was crucial to the case?
It was important.
And this timeline, he started talking about what he'd done from, I believe, 2 or 3 days before the disappearance. It started on the 28th, on the Friday. And he went until, well after, until I showed up on February 5th at 20th Precinct, correct?
Yes, sir.
And would you agree that as a homicide detective, that it's going to be incredibly important to dig through and research and check every single thing that you say?
It would be important.
And is it fair to say that by the time he gave you that timeline, that took place on February 8th, correct?
I believe so.
By then, you'd already caught him lying about the status of his marriage, correct?
Yes.
You had already caught him what you viewed as a lie, correct? Excuse me. I'll withdraw that statement. By that date, on February 8th, you start going through and you start having Mr. Durst list what he did each day in writing, correct, by time here. He's telling you that you're writing all your notes, correct?
Correct.
And by this time, you already knew that Mr. Durst was physically abusive with his wife, correct?
Well, this is 3 days later. I've already started to hear that from people, yes.
And detective, so at that time, is it fair to say that by February 8th, Bob Durst is your only suspect in this case?
Well, yes, specifically, yes. At that point, he's the only other one at that point that would stimulate me as a suspect, if you're going to use that term.
Detective, are you aware, and I'm talking about back during the first week of your investigation. I'm asking what you know now, so I want to be clear. I want you to go back to the first week of your investigation. Did you catch Bob Durst in a lie about where he was on January 31st after he allegedly took his wife to the train station? 73. You don't remember?
Well, the 31st is...
31st is Friday.
Friday.
I'm sorry, 31st is Sunday, excuse me. So I'm asking you, did you become aware during the first week of your investigation that Bob Durst had lied about where he was on Sunday 31st after he allegedly took Kathie Durst to the Potomac train station?
I think one of the detectives had checked on a phone booth that he said he had made a call from, or...
Detective, I know that you don't remember all the intricacies about this case, but I'm asking you, as you sit here today, with all the reviews and discussions you've had about this case, and all the hours you put into it, you are unaware of the lie you caught Mr. Durst on that first week about his whereabouts on the 31st.
I guess I did. I just can't think of which lie you're talking about.
Well, when I say Bill and Ruth Mayer, do you know who they are?
People from the White House.
No. Bill and Ruth Mayer were Bob Durst's neighbors in South Salem. Does that refresh your recollection?
Oh, yes, yes.
Do you recall what Mr. Durst told you he did after he allegedly dropped Kathie Durst off at the Kentucky train station?
I don't remember right now what he said. Something about going to have a drink with somebody. Or...
Your notes indicate, you need to refresh your recollection. I want you to take a look. People 73. I want you to read page 3. It's on the screen. You see what we're talking about? Let me know when your memory's refreshed.
Yeah, that's it. That's good.
Does that refresh your memory?
Yeah.
He told you that when he got back to the train station where he dropped Kathie off, that he had drinks with the Mayers. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Do you remember if you talked to the Mayers?
I think another detective had followed up on this.
I want you to take a look. We're going to put up people 74. Do you know who Detective Mullitz is? M-U-L-I-T-Z? Who was that?
Bill News was a detective in our squad.
Hey, do you know is Detective Mullitz still alive?
He's deceased.
I want you to take a look at, I'm going to read it out loud, you can follow with me. It says, 2982, I, with Detective Struk, 20th PDU, responded to South Salem, New York, and conferred with New York, I'm sorry, let me go to the second paragraph, my fault. Withdraw that, please, that question. Second paragraph. At this time, we all entered the home of William Mayer and interviewed him and his wife, Ruth. They stated that on 138-2, the Durst came up to their home, and that sometime in the afternoon, Bob came over to the Mayer home and borrowed 2 hats. The 30th would be Saturday, detective. They both stated that they did not see Kathie in person on that weekend, and that was the only time that they saw Bob. The Mayers further stated that they went out on Sunday, 1:31:82, and that when they returned home at about 21:30 hours, 9:30, they don't recall seeing the Durst car. They further stated that on 2/3/82 at about 7 to 8, 1920 hours, 7 to 8 p.m., they invited Bob over for a drink and that he declined, stating that he had a cold. Mr. Mayer further informed us that on the Saturday after Christmas was the last time that Bob came over and had a drink with them. Does that refresh your recollection?
I remember seeing this document. Yeah.
So detective, you spoke to a witness on February 9th, 4 days into your investigation, who absolutely was telling you Bob Durst never came over to have drinks with us like he told you on Sunday the 31st. You agree that's what you were told, correct?
Correct.
Detective, if I were to ask you, as an experienced homicide detective, given what you knew about this case, would you agree that was a big lie that you caught him on, correct?
Yes, sir.
Detective, at that point in time, did it make you say to yourself, you know what? I don't know if Kathie Durst ever made it out of Westchester County.
Well, I don't know if that particular interview would totally suggest that, but it certainly was an inconsistency.
Inconsistency or lie?
Let's call it one.
So Bob Durst is telling you, he's giving you his alibi for the exact night that you believe at this point Kathie Durst has disappeared, correct? Is that right? And he's telling you that night that after he drops her off on the train, He was very clear, he was the last person to see her alive, is that correct?
Yes.
By the way, is there anybody else in the world that you know of that can support seeing Kathie Durst get on that train other than Bob Durst?
No.
So he tells you, got back, I had drinks with the mayors. And you go and you talk to the mayors, and the mayors tell you that never happened. At the time, did you believe the mayors at that time? You as an investigator, incredible people. Fair to say, they're a successful couple living next door with, as far as you knew, no motive whatsoever to lie. So at that point, detective, did you go immediately and have that South Salem house taken apart brick by brick?
No.
Why?
Well, it had, my recollection is that hadn't the children been in there at that point? Hadn't Church Bonnie been in there by that point?
Detective Harvey,
On,
as you testified, told you that he went in the house, and your words were to see if there was a body lying around.
already, any signs of foul play is probably what we,
Did you take CSU to that house?
no,
Did you get a warrant?
no.
As you sit here today, detective, isn't it your belief, as you sit here today, that Kathie Durst was murdered in that house?
Is it my belief she was murdered? in the
Yes,
house?
in that house.
I don't know.
Detective, isn't it true that back during your original investigation, that you became convinced during that original investigation, as you said before, that Kathie Durst never made it out of Westchester County?
That's my belief, yeah.
And isn't it your belief, detective, your belief back during the investigation, that Kathie Durst never got on that train?
I believe that's only much later on. That on the first, that the initial part of the investigation.
That's not what I'm asking. I'm saying, detective, by the time you are into that investigation, within weeks or maybe a month, you would agree that you had come to believe that Kathie Durst never made it out of that house in South Salem.
It keeps coming back, conflicting with what appears to have happened up in South Salem, but then it contradicts the fact that at that time we had Dr. Cooperman having her arrive in Manhattan that Monday. So which one had precedent at that point?
Detective, were you aware back in 1982 of how to get a search warrant for an out-of-county resident involved in a homicide investigation?
It would have been able to overcome, of course. It would have told the DA's office and they would have been pursued it that way.
So, would you agree, detective, that that house, during the original investigation, was never thoroughly searched and processed by you or your representatives from NYPD?
Right.
And would you also agree that as far as you know, that house was never thoroughly processed or examined by any other law enforcement agency other than what Trooper Harney told you he noticed walking in looking for a body lying around?
That's correct.
Would you agree, detective, that that was absolutely a huge mistake on your part, not having that done?
Looking back on it now, it would have probably been a good thing to do.
So, it's 4:30, and it's time for us to adjourn. Finish what you want then?
Thank you, Ron.
Your return department, returned to versus any other witness on the subject of your testimony. Return to the square at 10 o'clock. Return to part maybe when it's adjourned.
I hear that sound now, I feel like going home.
All right. Exhibits? Next
That was
section.
day 2 of 4, Your Honor.
2 of 4. All right, well, we'll go to day 3.
People are represented at all counsel. All right, shall we resume with the witness? May we resume the witness stand, sir?
All right, Detective Struk, welcome back. You remain under oath. And Mr. Lewin, you may begin or resume your cross-examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. Detective, I want to talk about the reports that you wrote on this case. By reports, I mean referring to either your DD5, your chrono, your notes, or what you have the detectives document who are you coming at. Is that, do you understand what I'm talking about right now? You said before, on either direct or cross, you said, if I wrote it, I did it. Do you recall that? And is that because you're taught very early on as a detective that you need to put anything important needs to be documented in writing?
Well, yeah, you record the facts, you gather the facts, and you move forward.
Well, in terms of my question, though, is you were taught during your career at the NYPD that anything important needs to be documented in writing, correct?
Yes, except for probably some things that are left out as to strategies or statuses and stuff like that with team meetings and supervisors or commanding officers. But gathering the facts from witnesses, those are recorded and maintained in the folder.
Have you ever heard the old axiom of, if it isn't documented in a report, it didn't happen?
Sorry, repeat that, please.
The old adage, of police officers, if it's not in my report, it didn't happen.
I may have heard it, but I don't know if I believe it.
Would you therefore agree with the statement that if you or investigators in this particular case, if there was anything important that came from your investigation, not including strategy meetings with command staff or prosecutors, etc., that it would be reflected in either notes, chrono, or D5?
For the most part, yes.
Is there anything you are aware of as you sit here today that you and your investigators did that's not documented?
35 years later, sir, I would just be guessing.
So as you sit here, there's nothing, no specific example that you ever come up with right now?
As I said, sitting here 35 years later, that's a difficult question to answer specifically.
Have you had a chance to review or even to think about between the time you testified a couple of weeks ago and now about the investigation conducted in this case?
Well, I certainly have thought about some of the questions that you had asked me. Yeah,
Have you reviewed any materials in the case?
yes.
And what specifically have you reviewed?
My chronology and my notebook.
So is it fair to say that you reviewed what you and the detectives under you did in this case?
Well, it was what I had to look at, yes.
And so when you mentioned what you did 35 years ago, you actually reviewed that in the last week and a half.
Oh, I had an occasion to look at it, yes. I see what I wrote in black and white as to the context of what was done before and after. A lot of those things are vague.
Do you recall that during cross-examination, I asked you if you could specifically come up with even one mistake that you were aware that you had made in this case? Do you recall that?
Yes.
Do you recall that your original response was you couldn't think of anything? Is that fair?
Yeah.
Would you agree that I had to repeatedly press you to get you to admit that you had made any mistakes at all?
I guess anybody's capable of making a mistake.
But no, what I'm asking you is, would you agree that even when I pointed out a couple of different mistakes that you had made, that it was difficult for you to say, hey, listen, you know what, that was a mistake?
Well, I don't remember which ones we had discussed.
All right, do you recall me bringing up Dean Cooper?
Yes.
Do you recall that I brought up the fact that you never asked Dean Cooperman any follow-up questions regarding how well he knew Kathie, how many times they had spoken on the phone, and whether he recognized her voice? Do you recall me bringing that up to you during cross?
Yes, I do remember you had framed your previous question to me that I made a mistake because I think you said at the time, did I write specifically what I asked him, what he asked me? Since the last time I sat here, I've had an occasion to think about that, and I'm bewildered by the fact that I could speak to two doctors on several occasions, going there for the sole purpose of ascertaining whether or not they spoke to this, what they thought was Kathie Durst that morning. I don't know how many ways I have to write or say specific words. I came away believing they spoke to her, or Cooperman spoke to her. So whether you want to say it's a mistake or not, that's your words. I felt comfortable that he spoke to her. Whether or not he came off it 10 years later, I don't care. I felt comfortable.
Detective, I asked you the last time you testified, it appears now you are backing away from it. I asked you,
Not.
let me go this way, Detective. Were you in fact asked about what questions you asked Dr. Cooperman relating to whether or not, one, you inquired of him if you recognized Kathie's voice? Do you recall being asked about that?
I do remember you asking it, and as far as me memorializing exactly the words that I asked and he replied, no, apparently they're not in my notes, but that was the reason I went there.
Detective, your answer on November 15th, 2 weeks ago was, yes, okay, I didn't ask. Are you now saying that's incorrect?
I'm not saying it's incorrect, I'm just saying it's not total.
Okay. And I then asked you if you perceived that to be a mistake. And you eventually responded, November 15, 2017, page 129, lines 12 through 26, so be it, yes. Do you recall that testimony?
I recall responding to your questions, whether or not, what specific questions I asked him. I don't remember how specific or what specific questions I asked. I went there to determine, was he comfortable that he spoke to her and he told me about diarrhea and missing classes and what the hell not. I was comfortable when I left, and as well as we could co-contributors.
How could you be comfortable when you never asked the witness, do you know what her voice sounds like?
Those are your words.
Detective, I also asked you again on November 15, 2017, and you ultimately agreed that had you known at the time that Dr. Cooper had never spoken to Kathie on the phone, did not know what her voice sounded like, that your investigation, quote, would probably have been different. Do you recall testifying to that?
If I believed that he did not speak to, of course it would have been a little bit different.
So, Detective, you also were asked questions, and you eventually conceded that it was a mistake not to have had the South Salem house searched. Do you recall that?
I recall that, and I've also rethought that as well since I did the arrest. And if I'm permitted to answer, okay. I recall speaking to the state police, whether it was Harney or the other fellow Lowell. On several occasions, I had gone up there. I had previously testified that there had been an entry into the place by one of the troopers. And my recollection now, having been asked that I'm up there with several of my own detectives that were with me at the time, and the state police are there. I think Lowell was a senior investigator and whatnot. There was discussion as to the prior entry by Kathie, whatever his name was and whatnot. And between the two groups, between the state police and our group, it was a discussion. Nobody had decided if it was worthy of gaining a search warrant.
Detective, isn't it your responsibility? You're the lead detective. Doesn't it fall on you to say, you know what? I got this guy lying to me about where he was that night. I have no information that Kathie actually got on the train other than what Bob Durst is saying. Wasn't it your responsibility to say, I'm going to take that house apart, brick by brick, and get my best people from NYP up there to do it?
We were up there on, I think, Monday, February 8th. This is still just a missing person case at that point. And if the state police are there, which really their jurisdiction at that point, and we're correlating what information I had gleaned already from Durst, from when I had spoken to him. And if the two groups together thought that the search warrant wasn't worthy at that point, that's really, like, sitting here today, 35 years later, that's what I can only feel.
Detective, who had the
So
responsibility?
who's right and who's wrong on search warrants? That's your choice.
Well, Detective, it's your case, not New York State.
It's my missing persons case.
And Detective, at that point in time, did you make any effort to apply for a search warrant?
No.
Did you make any effort to ask for consent to search the house?
No, apparently between Lowell and myself and the other detectives, it didn't seem appropriate at that time.
So, Detective, when you testified again 2 weeks ago,
I work in New York City, not South Salem.
Okay, please, wait until you hear the question and then answer only the question.
Detective,
So,
you have a scene in South Salem, a house, that the defendant and your missing victim are living in. You have information that's the last place that she was seen alive by the defendant, other than his statement that he took her to the train. And you've got, at that point in time, the defendant, you already caught him in a lie about where he was that night. Are those three things I said, are they true?
which lie are you referring to?
The lie that Mr. Durst said to you that after he dropped Kathie off at the train, he went and had drinks with the mayors. You knew about that, detective, within 5 days of her disappearing. You interviewed the mayors and you caught his line. Is that correct?
Yes, I did say that. As to what relevance we all plugged in that about the mayors at that point between the state police and myself, it just did not come to pass at that point that they were going to get a search warrant.
Detective, you testified on November 15th, page 149, lines 25 to 28. You finally conceded regarding not searching the house at the time. Quote, looking back on it now, it probably would have been a good thing to do.
Oh, hell yeah.
Detective, as you sit here today, it appears that you are trying to cast responsibility on the lack of the search of that house to the New York State Police. Is that correct?
Understood.
So, Detective, when you're talking about conversations you have with the New York State Police,
Right.
they are assisting you in your investigation, correct?
Well, I don't want to beat this into semantics. I have a missing person case. They have a resident in their jurisdiction. We don't know what we have at that point. We don't know what we have at that point.
Detective,
It had been entered. A trooper had gone through the premises, didn't see anything that suggested foul play. Where could we have taken it at that point? And it was a mutual decision that we came up with at that point.
Detective, so you're aware that Trooper Harding walked into the location, and in essence, his search consisted of seeing if there were any bodies or blood trails lying in the room that he walked into. Isn't that your understanding of the quote search he made?
That would be fair.
Detective, you had your CSU unit basically go into Riverside Drive and take it apart, correct?
Yes.
So why didn't you do the same thing with South Salem?
Because South Salem at that time didn't present a purpose to go in.
So you made the determination, you yourself as a lead detective, you decided, you know what, I'm not going to ask for consent, I'm not going to try to get a warrant, I have decided that, you know what, it's not worth my time to have that location searched. Is that correct?
Those are your words.
What are your words?
My words are, I had crime scene unit go up to Riverside Drive because I believe that the case was in Manhattan. That she had made it to Manhattan that day, so I felt that Riverside Drive was at least the potential of a primary crime scene. That's South Salem.
Detective, you've already testified, though, that within a very short time, 2 weeks or months, you came to the conclusion, based on your investigation, that whatever happened to Kathie Durst did not happen in Manhattan, and you believe likely happened in Westchester, correct?
Yeah, as I became aware of certain things later on, as the case went forward, sure, you change your views, you change your opinions and whatnot, but when you were bringing me back to that Monday, the 8th, this was a very new case. It was a missing person case. There was a lot of other things in play, cocaine people and whatnot. So, no, that's what we had decided mutually between myself and state police. I never blamed the state police.
Well, Detective, as you sit here right now,
Yeah.
I just want to be clear. You're mentioning that you spoke to the state police, but ultimately, the decision was yours, correct?
I don't know how you say it was mine. It would have to be mutual.
So are you
If
saying...
the law, excuse me, sir, please. If the state police at that point felt, hey, it's worthy of going in, of course we would have done it.
Detective,
Yeah.
were the state police, were they doing the same level of investigation at that time regarding the disappearance of Kathie Durst that you were?
I don't know if they totally paralleled what I was doing at that point, because I had initiated the missing person case. They came into it based on the fact that they had a residence there that she had been seen, I think, on Sunday, the 31st or something like that. So they became part of it early on.
Detective, you had a task force of detectives that were assigned, including yourself, who were working this case early on. Is that correct?
We did have 2 or 3 extra detectives early on at that point, yes.
Well, among them, you had Mullins, you had Varian, you had Gibbons, and there are other detectives as well. We're going to go back through them.
Yeah.
So are you going to hold to the fact that it's only 2 or 3 people?
No, I never said specifically how many. There were several. I don't know how many came. I know Gibbons and that didn't go up there with me, but several of them did.
Detective, there were close to 10 detectives that were working various aspects of this case from NYPD under your command, correct?
Not my command, in conjunction with me. I'm not a commanding officer.
Who was the lead detective on the case?
I was.
And you have testified, by the way, you testified during the direct examination of Mr. DeGuerin, when you were asked about what certain individuals did, certain detectives, that they were under your command. Is that correct?
I don't think I ever used the word command. I'm not a commanding officer. I was a detective.
You were the coordinating detective. You were the detective in charge of the case, correct?
That would be.
If you're comparing that group of detectives to one trooper who takes a report of a burglary and goes over there and says, I don't see anything when I walk in, and you're telling me those are parallel investigations?
It was not just one trooper. There was a sergeant, there was Lowell, there was Kidney, or whatever. I recall there was 3 or 4 of them.
Detective, in the end, you made the decision on your own. Ultimately, you decided, I'm not going to search that house. Is that correct? Yes or no?
If you want me to say that I didn't overrule anybody, well then that's fine to say. I came away with a mutual understanding that there was no basis to enter that place with a search warrant.
Detective, at the time, did you need to have the permission or the consent of the New York State Police to either get a consent to search or to have a search warrant for the South Salem house?
Did I need their permission?
Yes.
Probably not, but I would still have to go through with them to assist me in obtaining that.
Detective, probably not. Isn't it, in fact, correct, Detective? You're well aware, you testified when you were here on cross-examination 2 weeks ago, that you have done and served search warrants out of county on other cases, correct?
I don't remember that question being asked.
Have you served search warrants out of county on other cases, or are you aware of them being done in your years at NYPD homicide?
I may have.
So you're saying, if you sit here right now, you're not sure whether or not in the years you worked at NYPD homicide, whether there were search warrants executed in your cases outside of your county?
What I am saying is that if I thought there was a basis to go in, and if Lowell thought there was a basis to go in, we would have gone in with a search warrant.
So, Detective, was there anything stopping you from asking Mr. Durst for permission to search the house?
I don't recall that. I don't recall that coming up. It was whether or not we were going to obtain a search warrant is what you've been questioning me about.
Detective, it didn't come up because you didn't ask him, correct?
I don't remember.
Well, Detective, wouldn't you have documented in your report, we asked the defendant or the suspect for permission to search his house, he refused? Clearly, you would have documented that, correct?
Yes, I would.
Can you tell me in any of your notebooks, chronos, DD5s, is that documented?
No.
So would you agree, Detective, that it did not happen?
That would be fair to say.
Detective, those are the 2 examples that we discussed last time we were here of mistakes that you eventually conceded you had made. My question is, in the 2 weeks since, are you aware, having gone through all these materials, of any other mistakes that you made?
You termed a mistake. I call it a decision that we made mutually with people. If you want to hear it as a mistake, so it's a mistake.
So, Detective, this is my question.
Okay.
Are you aware, as you sit here, of any other specific mistakes other than anything involving Dr. Cooperman or the search of the house? Detective, listen to my question. You've now had 2 weeks where you've looked through all your materials.
I don't have all my material, so I don't have all my material.
You've looked through your notebook,
I copy that.
which had all your notes and everything you did on the case, correct?
Well, everything that was memorialized in the notebook, yes.
And you already testified that anything of importance would have been memorialized in the notebook, correct?
Most things that I would, as we were going along gathering facts, would have gone in there, yeah, if I thought they were pertinent at the time, sure.
And Detective, you also looked through the DD5s on the case, correct?
I haven't seen the DD5s in many years.
The notes, the DD5s are made from notes, correct, originally?
Yes.
And so you would agree, Detective, that if there's one thing that a homicide detective from NYPD of your vintage, of your time of service, one thing they're going to ask for if they're going to be reviewing the case they worked on is, get me my notebook, correct?
Yeah.
And you have it, you reviewed it.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to give you the opportunity now, as I did 2 weeks ago. Can you tell me, are there any other specific mistakes that you are aware that you made?
I don't know.
Detective, have you had any conversations with the defense? Anybody on the defense team since you left court? No.
Yes.
Who have you spoken to?
Mr. DeGuerin called me
And when did he call you?
about a week ago.
And can you tell me what did the two of you discuss?
He said to me that when he has,
Your Honor, pause People's 57 at 25 minutes.
Right, and you'll go back to capture that question and answer since it was cut in the middle of the answer. Time for an afternoon break. Do not converse among yourselves or with anyone else on any subject connected with this case. Do not form or express any opinion on the case. We'll see you at 3:15. Okay.
That would give you an opportunity to tell them what time to come.
I'd like them to be here at 9. I'd like you to be, well, of course, Mr. Durst might not be dressed until 9 o'clock.
We could waive his appearance for purposes of the legal issue, Your Honor.
Okay, 8:30.
Your Honor, we're going to ask that since they're scheduling a debate on a legal issue, it's only fair that we be told what the debate is going to be so that we can prepare.
Yeah, no, my pleasure.
No, but you don't need to bother Rona with that.
Okay, no, we don't.
Okay,
No, John.
thank
Thanks,
you.
Sean.
Recess.